In order to succeed, we need leaders of inspired idealism, leaders to whom are granted great visions, who dream greatly and strive to make their dreams come true, who can kindle the people with the fire from their own burning souls. The leader, for the time being, whoever he may be, is but an instrument to be used until broken and then to be cast aside. And if he is worth his salt, he will care no more when he is broken than a soldier cares when he is sent where his life is forfeit, in order that the victory may be won. In the long fight for righteousness, the watchword for all of us is spend and be spent.
Though Sinclair's book, The Jungle, did not fulfill its original intention of providing all workers the same benefits and good working conditions, it did change the sanitation and packaging of meat and prompted two important laws to be passed, the Federal Food and Drug Act of 1906 and the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906. In addition, it led to the establishment of what is now known as the Food and Drug Administration, also known as the FDA. The welfare of the wage worker, the welfare of the tiller of the soil. Upon these depend the welfare of the entire country. Their good is not to be sought in pulling down others, but their good must be the prime object of all our statesmanship. Theodore Roosevelt, the man with the muckrake.
The Jungle, an exposé about the Chicago meatpacking industry, was published in 1906 by Upton Sinclair, the catalyst of the revolution against the meatpacking industry. The meatpacking industry was in charge of packing, processing, and distributing meat to the American public. This novel disclosed many of the horrifying circumstances that could be commonly found in meatpacking factories, such as adulterated milk, use of aniline soda water, the processing of meat that lay in piles on the floor mixed with billions of consumption germs, thousands of rats, poisoned bread, rotten meat, and the remains of people falling into vats. Quoting The Jungle, the meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat, even if he saw one. There were things that went into sausage, in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. There was no place for the men to wash their hands before they ate their dinner, and so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was to be ladled into the sausage.
At this time, hundreds of immigrants were flocking to the United States in the hopes of better lives. Many of these immigrants came to Chicago, where the meatpacking industry was strong and where it was said that jobs were in surplus. Immigrants were forced to work for minimum pay. According to The Jungle, some men received a mere $1.57 per day and worked 12 to 14-hour days. They were forced to work in dangerous environments with horrible conditions. Jobs in factories usually lasted for a week or two before the foreman would find another person that would work for cheaper pay. Child labor was common, as 1.75 million children between the ages of 10 to 15 worked full-time to provide for their families. The average work week was 53 hours, 13 hours greater than the average 40 hours in the 21st century. Out of 10,000 workmen in Chicago during the 1900s, 1,200 died from accidents and illnesses caused by bad sanitation.
In 1904, Sinclair was licensed by Fred Warren, the editor of the socialist journal Appeal to Reason, to pen a novel about the immigrant workers in Chicago meatpacking houses.
Sinclair went into the plants and he saw dead animals being slaughtered. He saw filth all over the plant. He saw products going into sausage that shouldn't have been there. But more importantly, he came out of the plant radicalized by what happened to the workers, how they got chewed up the same way the food did.
After reading The Jungle, the American public was so outraged with the poor sanitation found in the meatpacking industry that they ignored Sinclair's actual message on improving poor working conditions and moving toward a socialist structure. As a novel, Sinclair's The Jungle succeeded and gained mass popularity amongst the American public, and people clamored to read the novel. According to the Minneapolis Journal, The popularity of the jungle grew to such an extent that people were willing to pay 5 cents a week at the library to get a copy of the novel. The public was so horrified by the poor sanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry that there were boycotts against meat and protests by unions such as the Housewives Alliance.
All the stuff from the jungle became known once meat sales dropped, a third over the country.
As a result, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act the same day as the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906, established the FDA, brought significance to the previously created USDA, and started the change in the food industry regulation.
Sinclair was displeased by the reaction that the jungle received from the American public. He said that his purpose for writing The Jungle was to set forth the breaking of human hearts by a system which exploits the labor of men and women for profit. Sinclair's aim to pull on the heartstrings of men and women and to bring to light the injustices that workers face daily missed its mark, as demonstrated by his famous quote, "I aimed at the public's heart and by accident hit it in the stomach." Sinclair's views also clashed with the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906 because it did not address his socialist point of view. The law allowed the factories to remain privately owned, which meant the owners could continue to exploit and mistreat the workers.
Sinclair's goal in writing The Jungle was not to become a muckraker, exposing the poor sanitation practices in the meatpacking industry, but rather to bring attention to poor working conditions. Upon initial arrival in Packingtown, Chicago to research for his novel, he made his intent clear by stating, "I am Upton Sinclair, and I have come to write the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the labor movement." He was labeled a muckraker by President Roosevelt, a term the president reserved for journalists, or people who expose business corruption and political issues. Sinclair, on the other hand, believed himself to be a novelist and an accidental muckraker.
However, despite the success of labor and sanitation laws against poor working conditions were not enforced until the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, also known as the FLSA. The failure to address the social issues for immigrants led to a lasting legacy of discrimination and advanced poverty among those new to the United States. Though actions were taken against poor sanitation in the meatpacking industry, none were taken against the poor working conditions directly after the publication of Sinclair's novel. On the other hand, it created an organization crucial to the safety and well-being of food today, the FDA.
It was his intent to show the horrible conditions, but it didn't lead to any labor reforms per se. There was no attempt to fix the conditions.
Upton Sinclair's The Jungle was a revolutionary novel exposing intolerable working conditions and deplorable sanitary conditions in the meatpacking industry in the early 1900s and caused great turmoil among the public. The White House was bombarded with an onslaught of mail demanding change in the food industry sanitation. In a letter to Congress, President Roosevelt declared, "A law is needed which will enable the inspectors of the federal government to inspect and supervise from the hoof to the can the preparation of the meat food product." This law became the Meat Inspection Act of 1906.
Passage of this act led to other concerns about food safety and the health of the consumer. For over 20 years, a law to regulate food and drug had been put on standstill. However, the uproar over The Jungle revived the support for this movement. On the same day as the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 was passed, another law known as the Pure Food and Drug Act became a law. This law led to the formation of what is now known as the Food and Drug Administration, also known as the FDA.
The Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act are the basis of all of our food safety regulations today. They brought our understanding of food safety basically into modern time. Every time we update our regulations to reflect advances in science, we have to go back to those laws to do so.
Sinclair remains a leader in American history and leaves the legacy of being the propelling force behind the first laws regulating the nation's food supplies, a legacy that will continue to impact generations to come. In the words of Upton Sinclair, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his job depends on not understanding it."